Hey guys, welcome to Overcrest. I'm Kris. I've got a special episode for you guys today. I've been looking forward to this episode for probably about 2 years. Ivan Ligovsky, better known as Vagabond on YouTube. He's well known for his travels around Russia, looking at abandoned places, obscure cities, and taking interesting ways of getting there. Hitchhiking, freight hopping, on foot. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing the way he travels and engages with his audience in a way that genuinely brings you into his exploration. I'm really excited to have him on. Make sure you check out his YouTube channel. The link is going to be in the show notes. And if you feel so obliged, head over to his Patreon and give the man some support. His travel is inspiring, inspired me. I'm sure if you got into it, it would inspire you as well. Here is my interview with Ivan Ligovsky, better known as Vagabond. Ivan Ligovsky, man, thank you so much for coming to hang out on the podcast. I'm honored that you found the time between trains to come hang out with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, this is step one to finding someone that I can have get me a lotta. So that's the whole motivation here. Is at the end of the episode, I'm hoping you like me enough that you'll help me source a lotta down the road.
We'll see. Yeah, let's start.
Yeah, it's one of the things I notice when I see your, obviously as a car guy, when I'm watching your videos and stuff like that, I'm like, look at that car, look at that car, look at that car, especially the one in northeastern Russia. Like, was it Chukotka? Is that how you pronounce that? Is that right?
You probably mean Chukotka.
Chukotka, yeah.
The very remote Russian region, exactly.
Yeah. I used to look at that area quite a bit, but there's all these vehicles with these huge tires because everybody's driving around in Siberia, right, where there's tons of snow. And I think of the ultimate journey, which is impossible right now for me, would be to get in my car. I'm in Minnesota, which is north central United States, and I would drive to Alaska, and there would be a bridge or a ferry that would go across the Bering Strait to Chukotka, and I would be able to drive across Russia all the way to France. I mean, that would be the dream, but there's no bridge and there's no ferry. There's no way. Even though it's only 50 miles, it's like you could almost canoe it.
Yeah, exactly. There are, you probably know these two islands which create the actual border between Russia and the United States. Large and small diameter, if I'm not mistaken. And the distance between them is even less, if I'm not mistaken, less than 5 kilometers or something. And these are two completely different worlds, separated by the ocean, by Bering Strait to be precise. Yeah, exactly. I hear you. Actually, the journey across Bering Strait is one of the dream journey for me personally. Not necessarily on the car. I was thinking about crossing the Bering Strait just by foot at some point. Well, maybe after some years I will eventually make it, because it's not always possible, if I'm not mistaken. It may. Yeah, of course, if there are no bridges, no ferries, no actual connection. But sometimes it just gets frozen, and some, let's call them professional travelers, manage to eventually cross it. And some local tribes too. Some representatives of Chukchi or some Alaskan tribes, at least that's what I heard on the internet, managed to travel between Chukotka and Alaska naturally, somehow, on their sleighs, on their skis. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's you have to kind of hop on some of the ice floes, because I think it freezes, but I think it's in constant motion. So I think all the ice, it's like constantly shifting. So there's points where you're going to have to just jump, which seems ridiculous to me.
Journey.
Yeah,
I
mean,
if so sketchy.
You fall in, you're going to die, right? I mean, you're in the middle, you're 50 miles out, 25 miles out into the ocean. The water, it's salt water. So it's probably 28, 30 degrees or whatever it is. The water is freezing. You're not going to make it, man. You're not going to start a fire on this little ice float thing and somehow come out alive. That would be awesome. It would be, I guess you'd have to hitchhike to, I guess there's not really any towns out there. You kind of just have to, how do you get out to the coast where you would start?
On the Russian side, you mean?
Yeah. How would you get out there?
Exactly, like there are no roads that exist year-round. There are some winter roads that only exist in winter or, let's say, early spring, when frosts are still in place in Russia. For example, you can get from the mainland of the country to the city of Pievek, which is not even close to Bering Strait, but it's probably the northernmost town in Russia. It's also located in Chukotka, but the road there, the actual road, exists only 2 or 3 months during the year. So it's not an easy journey. And speaking about the actual Bering Strait, I have no idea if it's actually possible because not all of the settlements in Chukotka are accessible by roads. So you have to either take a light airplane or a helicopter to get there, or maybe use some more traditional methods like sleighs, skis. But it's going to be a long journey without an engine.
What do those people do up there? I mean, if you have to take a plane to get somewhere, is it just are these self-sufficient communities that don't really need anything from the outside world?
Well, in the era of globalization, probably they still need some, at least some basic amenities or something. But in my opinion, most of them just maintain their traditional lifestyle. I mean, many of these towns and small settlements are located on the coastline, so they do what they used to do for centuries. They do fishing, they do hunting, they also maintain deers, like cattle or something,
Yep.
primarily deers, and that's their major business. Let's call it this way.
Yeah. I think the way to do this trip, first of all, it's illegal, very, very, very illegal. Probably more illegal to go from United States to Russia than it is to go from Russia to United States. I think once you arrive in the United States, customs is probably a little a little more lenient. I don't know than it would be in Russia, but I think you're supposed to go to do it legally. You would have to go from one port of call to another port of call, and I think the closest one is Providencia, which is very, very far from the Bering Strait. That I don't know how you would get there other than hiking. So you could do it legally if you somehow got to Providencia, but you wouldn't be able to walk there. You'd have to take a boat, maybe take a canoe. I don't know how you would make it happen, but it sounds like an amazing journey, man. At least there's something left for you to look forward to. I scrubbed through your YouTube channel again this morning, and I've been watching you for years. I've been watching your content. And man, you've been everywhere. Is there anywhere left that you still haven't been or want to go?
Well, at least speaking about Russia in particular, there are still regions of the country that I haven't visited yet. The most well known probably would be Kamchatka. This peninsula, it's close to Chukotka, a huge portion of land in the far east of the country. It's also inaccessible by motor road, by the way, so you can only fly there or take a ferry from the mainland. And yeah, it's quite remote, and that's the main reason why I still haven't visited it. Yeah,
Um,
and
it's I think it's
yeah,
easy to misunderstand how big Russia is. I was watching
sure.
one of your clips, and you were in Chukotka, and you were in your Chukotka. Gosh, the names are tough for
Yeah, you
Americans.
pronounce it correctly.
Yeah, it's tough for an American. So you looked at your phone, and you're going, okay, this is the time in Moscow, and this is the time here. And I think it was, gosh, it was like
8 hours of difference.
eight time zones. Eight time
Exactly.
zones? That is crazy. There's only three in the United States. The West Coast and East Coast, only three time zones. So if you think of it in scale of time zones, it's absolutely enormous. And I always imagine having the capital city on one far side of the country and then everybody else is way over here leads to such massive cultural differences.
Exactly. So, speaking about Russia, you can tell that this country never sleeps. Just because when one part of the country goes to sleep, another part is awake. And this is the constant cycle, never ending cycle, basically. And yeah, speaking about this journey to Chukotka in particular, I very liked the moment when I was in the airport in Moscow when I was waiting for my flight to depart. So there were other passengers, of course, aside from me, and most of them seemed to be locals. So those who lived in Chukotka. And it like I had the strong feeling that I was staying in a bus stop in a village where people knew each other and communicated with each other on daily basis. So I didn't feel this distance that was supposed to be covered during that journey. 8 time zones. That was around 6,000 kilometers by airplane uh, on a single haul. But at the same time, it was such a close community by which I was surrounded in the airport, and it just made me feel home.
They
But I
made you
wasn't
feel
home.
good. They
Yeah,
made you feel good, so they brought you into their
exactly.
community a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't
That's
even have to communicate with them. I was just able to observe them talking between each other, and that was enough to feel it.
so that brings me to the question of hitchhiking. And I've picked up a couple of hitchhikers here in America, and it is extremely frowned upon here. And
Mhm.
I think it's kind of a product of the 1970s when everybody got really scared of doing anything. It became dangerous to hitchhike because it got sensationalized in the news that you would probably get chopped up into little pieces and put into a box and buried somewhere remote if you decided to hitchhike. What is the feeling of hitchhiking in Russia? Is it acceptable? Is it the norm? Is it weird like it is here? Before we get any farther, I want to talk about FCP Euro. They are an online retailer of OE, OEM, genuine aftermarket, and performance parts for European cars. From BMW to Porsche, Volvo, and more, their catalog is a one-stop shop with over 275,000 unique products, including expert-assembled kits to make shopping simpler. Actively building out the VW, Audi, and Porsche catalogs from current to our favorite classics, including the Mark I Scirocco free ride car, they are working to have every part you need for all of your cars. Plus, every product they sell is backed by a lifetime replacement guarantee, even wear items like wiper blades, brake pads, and oil filters. Some people even send back their motor oil. Sending back brake pads? I can't believe it. Use up your brake pads, send them back. Lifetime guarantee. Wild. With the opening of their distribution center in Mesa, Arizona, FC Pure is now shipping parts from both coasts, serving most of the country in 3 days or less with the free shipping option. Of course, I can never wait, so I always bump my shipping up and just pay for next day air or 2-day air because I just got to get it done. We at Overcrest have been working with FC Pure for years and can vouch for them. Real people who are passionate about what they do and the cars we love, while making sure that they put you, the customer, first. Check them out today at fcpeuro.com and take advantage of free shipping on any order over $49.
It seems to be quite a reliable means of transportation, frankly speaking. My very first hitchhiking experience happened when I was 16 years old. It was a very short distance, around 30 kilometers near my hometown, but I still managed to hitchhike it easily. And from that very first attempt, I realized that it was not a big deal, effectively. So after that, having realized that, I basically traveled all around the country by hitchhiking, and there was not a single corner, at least in Russia, where I experienced any difficulties in terms of hitchhiking. Maybe aside from some agglomerations of major cities such as St. Petersburg and Moscow, where average waiting time of the car just increases naturally because there is more dense flow of car, dense traffic, and each single driver thinks, okay, well, I don't bring this guy, but maybe someone else will bring him. And this is the repetitive cycle, and eventually you spend 2, maybe 3 hours on the road. But all in all, finally, someone still picks you up. And, frequently I noticed while hitchhiking that when you spend a lot of time waiting, you eventually catch that exact ride that will get you either to your destination or as much close to it as possible.
Was that first hitchhiking experience that you had, did that give you the seed to continue to do it more? Or why do you do what you do? How did this start? Why is Ivan traveling all over Russia looking at it? How did that happen? Why?
Well, from the very beginning, like from my childhood, I was just curious about the world, about traveling in general. But as long as I was a child, I wasn't able to travel on my own. So it started from just yearly trips of me with my family to Black Sea coast. So when my mom was working, she had a vacation, annual vacation, and she had her favorite place on the Black Sea. And he grabbed me, my father, and we all went to that particular town on the Black Sea by train. And each time the journey took 2.5 days just one way because my hometown is located far away from the coastline. And totally, so if you consider back and forth, so like a round trip, It was around 5 days in the train. And that basically set the seeds of traveling in my mind, in my opinion, personally. When I was even younger, when we just started going to that Black Sea, I was just obsessed by some, I would call it basic forms of geography. I was particularly impressed by world flags. So I just started painting them in my album, putting down some capital cities of countries. I had an interest in that all, basically. And after time, it just transformed into actual activity of traveling. So from theoretical interest to practical one. So I just decided to give it a go at around the age of 16 when I finally managed to decide to hitchhike. I knew it was possible, but I was still concerned because, I wasn't even legal age. And when I tried it for the first time, I realized that, well, it works pretty good. It's a reliable means of transportation. People are actually not that sketchy as many other people describe them, sorry. And yeah, that worked. So hitchhiking worked equally well, almost equally well, wherever I go.
Yeah, it's the two hitchhikers I've picked up here. Maybe it's three. I think it's three. One was this woman who was pretty methed out. She was on something, and I've been told now by people, hey, don't pick up women because it's a trick. You pull over and the woman gets in, and then they come and get you. And I don't feel like that's always going to be the case. Anyway, she told me this story about how she needed to get to her husband who was in the hospital and stuff like that. So I let her in and we drove. The other one was these two men that were hiking in Death Valley. It was very hot. I didn't have air conditioning, but I figured riding in the car would be easier than hiking. So I crammed these two guys and their suitcases into the back seat. And the other one was actually near my house. It was extremely hot outside. I think it was 95 degrees in Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but this dude he was a really big guy and he was just profusely sweating. And I'm like, dude, man, do you need a ride? Do you need a ride wherever you're going? Because it was on the side of the freeway. This guy is just walking. He's not hitchhiking. He doesn't have his thumb out. He's just walking and clearly suffering. His feet are just shuffling along. He's like, oh, yeah, thank you so much. And by the time I think I drove him, 15 miles to his house, I said, you were going to walk 15 miles? He's like, yeah, I just lost my job. I don't have a car. I didn't know what to do. So I just started walking. So gave that guy a ride home. And I think I haven't seen too many hitchhikers here, but my tendency is to always pick them up because there's some situation either they're trying to get somewhere. What are the odds that a hitchhiker is a bad or sketchy guy? It's got to be pretty low.
You never know actually who is on the road, I must admit.
Yeah.
But well, frequently some experienced hitchhikers and travelers just differentiate themselves from different people on the road. So they may wear some bright clothes to look distinct, or I don't know. So just by seeing them, you can understand that these are not like bums or something, not like homeless people. So they're actual travelers. At least that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm
Right.
trying not to get stinky. I'm trying to look relatively well. And that just gives the first impression to the driver. And that's the reason why he stops, he or she. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, everybody judges, right? If you're in a hotel and you have the little peephole on the door, the little window where you look through,
Yep.
Someone knocks, you don't just open the door. You look through the peephole first to see if you want to open the door, and you're going to judge that person and see if you're going to let them into your hotel room or not. And I think hitchhiking is probably the same way.
Yeah,
I've
exactly. And the famous saying, don't judge the book by its cover, doesn't work in hitchhiking because this is what you eventually do at the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was your first big trip that you decided to do?
Well, it depends what we consider big, but let's call it a trip which I conducted when I just turned 18 years old. I finished my school, graduated from my school, and went on a trip to Moscow and back, following different rounds on the way to Moscow and on the way back. So I combined different means of transportation, so primarily hitchhiking and train hopping. And that was the actual, even though it wasn't my very first ride on freight trains, It was my actual beginning of the train hopping story, let's call it this way, because it was the very first long ride on freight trains. And I had actually no idea how to properly, let's say, travel on them. I only knew I already had some knowledge about the railway, but there was some nuances about which I was not aware. But I had a lot of friends associated with the railway, and one of them basically instructed me, gave me some instructions. How should I act? Where exactly should I catch the train? What kind of train would be appropriate for me? And since then, I learned it. And
What are some of those? What are some of those reasons? Like what makes a good?
maybe it's because I'm just naturally not really like obsessed, but I just have an interest to the railway again from the childhood. Because as I told you
Yeah.
before, we traveled with my family by trains, and this love of the railway appeared in my mind exactly in the childhood. And before I actually started traveling by freight trains, what I did was filming trains. You know the term rail fanning? When
Yeah.
you just enjoy trains, not necessarily film them, but I actually filmed it. Both photos and videos, and it's lasted for several years before I actually reached some reasonable age to start traveling on my own. That's when I actually started riding freight trains too. So I started hitchhiking first.
Mhm.
That's true. But after some time, I also discovered that it's kind of possible to travel by freight trains too. So why not to try?
Yeah, what makes a good train? How do you know it's the one that you want to get on? What are some of the tips that you could have if somebody wants to go and do this? How do you know, this is the one you want to get onto?
It usually depends where a train goes, what kind of line you are driving, you are riding. But so my personal favorite trains are basically these kind of trains that consist of wagons without the roof. So basically gondolas. They are designed for transporting coal, timber, ballast. That could be any kind of cargo, basically. I
Yep.
mean, they are good in terms of the absence of roof, so you can just get inside them and be hidden by the walls of wagon from the outside world. So no one will just see you unless someone stays on the overpass or bridge. So it gives you this sense of, well, privacy and security, which is most important because riding freight trains is mostly illegal activity. It's usually a minor crime, of course, but still, if you have an opportunity not to be seen by security guards, you'd rather do so.
Okay, so take me back to your first trip. So you found the train and you're on the train on your first big trip to Moscow. Tell me more.
So it was actually my way back from Moscow to my hometown. So the journey was supposed to be around 1,000 kilometers in total. And I decided to cover 80% of this journey by freight trains. So I was traveling between Moscow and the city of Kazan in Russia. So I contacted one of my friends who explained to me where I should start. So I was in Moscow in the city, and it happened that the train yard, which I was supposed to start the journey, was located outside Moscow. So first of all, I just had to take a local train, electric train, outside Moscow. It took me around an hour and a half to get to that exact railway station, which was mentioned in the dialogue with my friend. And this station was notable by the fact that it was sort of the local junction where different lines, railway lines, connected to one. And so basically at that point, I could be sure that I was catching the exact train, that it would go the exact direction. Because after that junction, there were no other junctions. So I arrived there, so I arrived to that railway station by electric train, got off it, waited for around 30 minutes till I noticed that a freight train was approaching me from the back, so it was going the right direction. And it was consisted of that exact wagons, like gondolas, the ones
Yep.
designed for transferring coal. Yeah, but they were empty back then, so the train was moving slowly with the speed of around 15 to 20 kilometers per hour. That was enough to catch it on the fly, so basically to get inside this train while it was moving slowly. I made it and carried on my journey all the way to Kazan, so 800 kilometers without changing trains. So There were two important moments because it's impossible for such kind of train to travel such a long distance like with one crew. Crew is basically people who drive the train, right? So
Yeah.
each crew has a time limit, has a deadline after which it must be changed. Usually it varies between 8 to 12 hours. It's a standard duration of crew shift. So I was also instructed which stations were supposed to be crew change station along the way of my train. So I already knew them, and it was an important knowledge because one of these stations had a security system. It's basically this kind of the construction in form of the frame above the railway where some cameras were located and they were looking down. So they were examining the cargo, the content of the train, basically. And as long as the train was empty, there was no cargo under which I could, for example, hit. I had to get off the train when it approached this kind of frame with cameras. I basically ran around that frame because the train was moving slowly. I got back in the same train and just waited for the crew change. So I was sure that I wasn't seen by anyone. There were no workers around. And yeah, after 2 hours or something, the crew was changed of that train and it just departed further to my destination. There was another crew change along the way. There was no this kind of frames, so I just waited for another crew change and finally made it to my destination.
There's some places that you've done train hopping and travel where it's completely legal to ride the train and lots of people do it, right? Or not legal, but it's accepted as a form of transportation because I've seen these videos of, 50 people sitting in a train car in Africa.
Exactly. So Africa, that was the country of Mauritania. When I was riding this famous ore train, one of the longest trains in Africa. So it was.
How long? How long is this train?
So back to the time when I was there, the length of train was around, I wouldn't say it in meters or kilometers, it was around 100/130 wagons. So allegedly they can be even longer, but I didn't see longer trains. But still, it was fair enough for Africa, for the country of Mauritania. And yeah, exactly. So when we showed up at the railway station, waiting for the train, we already saw a bunch of people who were supposed to do the same thing. Funnily enough, those were tourists from different corners of the world. From Great Britain, from Denmark, there were guys from Germany, France. And it was a very weird experience because I didn't personally expect it. Because, who the hell would expect to ride a freight train in Africa in that exact day? But, I wasn't alone in my intention. So it happened to be a whole group of travelers, which paths somehow intersected in Mauritania. And we basically traveled together by that freight train. Yeah. And it was relatively legal in terms of that we were not kicked off by security guard. So before the departure of the train, he actually counted the exact number of us, so passengers in cargo wagon, potentially reported to the train engineer just to make sure that, well, everyone is on board. And that's it. So after that, the train just departed. No one boarded us.
If you're looking for the best app for navigating your next adventure, look no further than OnX Off-Road. With over 750,000 miles of trails and comprehensive offline maps, you can explore without worrying about cell phone service. The app features trail ratings, detailed information, and a Discover tool to help you find the trails near you. OnX Off-Road also includes public and private land boundaries, so you'll always know where you can legally off-road and camp. Plan trips. I'm just thinking about the interview we're doing. Legally, maybe not so important in some cases. Plan trips with ease using our route builder and share your adventures with friends. With the features like route tracking, waypoint marking, and real-time updates, you're equipped for any challenge. Ready to start your next adventure with confidence? Try OnX Off-Road free for 7 days. Download today and start exploring. Definitely check the app out. Download the app and just look at the way that their mapping software works. And especially if you use it on the computer, you can see the beautiful mapping that they have. It's really, really cool. At least download it. Check it out. It's free for 7 days. OnX.com. What was riding that train like? I mean, it must have been an absolute. You think of the wasteland of Russia, like Siberia and the Siberian wasteland. This is the opposite of that, right?
Exactly. It was just like the Sahara Desert all around, without a single tree that can catch your attention, aside from some small towns that were along the way of the train, of course. But yeah, it was pretty surreal. So I was enjoying it, of course. It wasn't the most ideal ride, just because, it was the desert, so sand was all around the air. So I had to put my balaclava to cover my mouth, to cover my nose. In this case, so in terms of this, it wasn't the most pleasant experience. But just the fact that I and my friend, my travel buddy basically, and a bunch of other people were riding this train in the middle of Africa, nowhere, under the stars of the night sky, it was just magnificent. I don't know how to describe it. It's
How long was that ride?
the ride last, so it began at the second part of the day, so in the afternoon at around 4 or 3 p.m. if I'm not mistaken. And we spent the whole night traveling by that train. Early in the morning, that train arrived at the station where most of passengers, so there were a bunch of locals aside from us tourists, so where most of passengers left the train. And we were also thinking about getting off the train straight there, because after that stop, the train started moving straight to the mine where ore was mined. And we didn't have a desire to go there because we knew that, well, it was highly likely that we would be interrogated by security of that mine. We didn't actually know what to expect from them because, it's Africa. Like, we wasn't sure that the law would be applied properly to us. But anyway, it worked, so we didn't manage to. So we managed to get off the train before the mine. We were seen by security. They didn't do anything against us. And that's it. So we got off the train 10 or 15 kilometers away from the nearest town. We basically managed to hitchhike the car that get us a lift to that town, and that's it. And then
So was that's a lot of times I feel like you're taking a train to get somewhere, right? That you're hopping on the train so you can get to whatever city, take a look at the city, and then maybe take the train back. Was this experience in Africa? Was the train the destination? Was riding that big train the reason to go, or were you trying to get somewhere?
So the train itself was the journey. So, or rather say, the journey was the thing, not the destination. Because initially, I didn't even plan to go to Africa that year. Funnily enough, it just happened that the friend with whom I traveled basically bought me a ticket to Mauritania from Turkey, because back to that year I was based in Turkey, and the flights were quite expensive, around $500 one way. And just, a friend of mine had some spare money. He just bought me a ticket and told me, like, well, we are going to Mauritania in a month or something. I was like, okay, dude, let's do it. And
you speak it. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm just saying that, speaking about Mauritania particularly, yes. So the train for this country was the main purpose of traveling. But at the same time, we also enjoyed exploring local communities. So before catching that train, we spent several days in the capital city of Nouakchott. And like, Mauritania happened to be my very first African country that I visited. It was not Egypt with these famous sea resorts, not Tunis or Morocco. It was just Mauritania, pure Africa. And I was excited by that. Didn't experience any negative emotion back then, frankly. Yeah, it was clear that people look, they lived poor life, it's true. But at the same time, they were still people. I mean, no offense to us, nothing. So I even managed to communicate with a bunch of them. We were even hosted by a family of Mauritanians, a huge family of Mauritanians living in a tiny town, which was, along the way of that train. Because when we moved towards the mining, towards the mining facility, we didn't get off the train. We just get on it and get off next to the mine, having spent around 16 hours in the train. But on the way back, we decided to make a change to see this exact tiny town along the way. And we arrived there in the evening, and we were eventually hosted by this friendly local.
Yeah, I think that when you think of poverty, there's poverty all around the world. But I think in certain places, there's not enough contrast. It's just all poor, and there's just not enough contrast for people to even care that they're in the situation that they're in. That's just their life, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. So, especially if you go to some off the beaten path destination, let's call them this way, where tourism is not a thing, so not touristy places, and you see how people live. At the same time, you understand that these people just have no idea how different their life can be. It's just something
Would it
from
even be
parallel
better though?
universe.
Would their life necessarily be better if it was different though? I feel like sometimes, I was thinking about, I was going through my budget and my bills and everything I have to pay every month the other day. And I just asked myself, why is there so much? Why do I have so much? Why do I keep struggling to get so much? What is like, how much happier could I be with more things or with more stuff? And you think of these people, whatever contrast they have in their lives, are they as happy as me with far less? I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, these people seem to value simple things about which we frequently forget, such as family, love, friendship. This is what they have in their life, and they stick to it.
So how do you prepare for one of these trips? What goes in your kit? Like you must have, I imagine that there's a backpack at Ivan's flat or whatever, and there's stuff in it that's like, this is my road trip backpack. What is in this backpack? How do you prepare for these trips, and what do you bring with you?
First of all, I must say that there are two backpacks with which I usually travel. The first one is a huge one, so it's like 90 to 100 liters, its volume, its capacity, sorry. And I also have a lighter one, 45 to 50 liters. So depending on the way I'm about to travel, I choose one of them. So speaking about the larger one, because most of my, let's say, wildest travels were conducted with this heavy backpack. So what usually is inside is what is. So first of all, this is the tent, which allows me to camp pretty much everywhere I want. Secondly, of course, sleeping bag, especially in Siberia, it's useful because nights there are cold even in summer. Travel mat, on which you can lay your sleeping bag so it creates sort of insulation from the ground. And just some basic things such as clothes that you can change on regular basis, medical kit, so like the first aid kit, which consists of some basic medicals like pills, of course, some patches, first aid kit. No need to describe it. Of course, some electronics such as cameras. Usually, I travel with my amateur camera. It's basically Canon 700D with 3 lenses in addition. What else? My GoPro with a bunch of batteries for this. A number of cables to charge all of these devices, adapters. It's all electronics, right?
Yep.
So high vis, a very important thing in my wardrobe, let's say, to be seen on the road in the darkness, or to pretend to be a railway worker, which also helps in railway yards. Yeah, the high vis.
They always say, like, if you have a ladder, you can get anywhere. If you just carry a ladder into a building, everybody's just like, yep, go ahead, no problem. That guy's got something going on.
Yeah, exactly.
All you need is a ladder and like a construction hat, like the helmet.
True.
That's all you need.
Yeah, exactly. This is how it works with the railway in terms of the high vis, for example.
Yeah.
And it's also useful for hitchhiking, once again, because you're better seen on the road.
Yeah, and you seem like you're hitchhiking on purpose. You're not hitchhiking because, you're sketchy. I'm hitchhiking. I'm doing this. I've got the thing on. I'm prepared. Here we go. Okay, so do you have anything to protect yourself with? Do you have any, not to out your weapons or anything, but how do you maintain your personal security?
Well, frankly speaking, I barely have anything that can actually protect me, like a knife or pepper spray. Well, sometimes I have a knife, of course, for cooking, but it's usually hidden somewhere deep in the backpack, so it's not like within my arm accessibility. So my major form of defense is diplomacy. I mean, I try to talk to people to avoid struggles, to avoid any negative consequences. And frequently, I rarely encounter them, which means that, I respect people with whom I travel. or with whom I'm speaking. And I frequently manage to catch the vibe of a person from the very first seconds of our discussion, and I can readjust myself to this vibe. So, I mean, I can somehow speak in the same pace as that individual, use the same slang as him or she. You got the point. So I'm
Yeah.
just trying to, well, maybe it's ignorant on my side, having no even pepper spray, right? Because hell knows. Because there is no 100% guarantee that diplomacy may work, right? But it's been working, at least for years.
What is the most interesting situation of diplomacy that you've been in with someone else?
So, first of all, I've never been threatened. Let's start from this. People were curious about my experience. Some of them expressed some negative opinions about that. So, for example, when I was hitchhiking in the middle of nowhere, deep at night in Siberia, I was picked up by a group of individuals. There were actually three of them in the car, and they were just driving to some faraway city across the night. And I was just telling them my story about my travels, the way I was traveling. So I was traveling by hitchhiking and train hopping. And they didn't find my story spectacular. I mean, they just started arguing with me, like, why do you do so? Think about your parents and stuff like that. At some point, they seem to become quite aggressive, but eventually, I just managed to explain them properly in proper manner that, well, guys, everyone has to live their life. That was my choice to live this way, and you are not obliged to agree with this. You have your right to disagree, of course. So let's just be respectful to each other, something like that. So I managed to
Yeah.
avoid you know, any serious consequence, negative consequence of that conversation. That was
What's
quite
the best
sketchy, but I managed it.
What was the best thing to come out of one of these conversations? How did a bit like just a conversation with a guy end up turning into something incredible?
It happened multiple times, so basically, random strangers either decided to share some things with me or maybe invited me to their place to overnight or just to have a lunch or just to talk to them in a peaceful manner. And yeah, that's always enjoyable experience. It happens actually pretty frequently, way more frequently than any negative experience on the road. Even such a minor thing as a share of water, especially when you travel in summer, when there is a high risk of dehydration, people understand it and they just naturally give you water, like, come on, drink it. You don't even ask them. You may even have your own water, 4 to 5 liters. They still insist on accepting it. And yeah, so random acts of kindness are always pleasant.
Yeah, I think it just in general, human beings have an understanding of each other. And it's easy to paint a broad brush over things that all people are like this or all people are like that. But I think on an individual basis, we all come to each other, especially in a situation like that, and we just kind of accept the other person for who they are. And I think that's just human nature to do that. And I think there's a lot more. I mean, I think you could probably do this for the rest of your life and probably only run into one or two negative experiences, if any. I think human beings are generally very good.
Yeah, and I must admit that kindness which was applied to me eventually affected myself. So probably if one day I will have a car, for sure I will stop for hitchhikers, or I will start just sharing my food or my things with them, especially if I see that they're in need. You know, it should be mutual.
Yeah. So you travel alone. You travel with friends sometimes, but you travel alone. It seems or appears that you travel alone a lot. How do you deal with the loneliness of being in these places that are so remote?
Exactly. So most of the time I travel solo, and it just happens naturally because the destination where I choose to travel are such hardly accessible that sometimes there is just no sense to invite anyone to join me because you already know that no one will be able to follow the same track. Going to Chukotka required taking a flight from Moscow. At the same time, most of my friends were based in another city, and they had their jobs, they had their life basically, so they just wouldn't be able to travel there. And that happens to most of my travels. So I usually, either limit myself intentionally by some time frames, or there are some time frames that exist naturally. So it's not like my limitation, they just are. And I have to stick to them. So I have to plan all of my movements in accordance with these deadlines. And I just don't have time to find compromises with other people on the way. Because when you travel with someone, of course, on the one hand, it might be funny, it might be more interesting, actually, which my experience showed me. But realistically, it's constant change of plans, which is not always what I'm looking for.
Some people can handle that. Some people can't handle that.
Yeah,
Some people can
exactly.
handle
And
the spontaneity. Some can't.
exactly. And personally, when I travel solo, I don't feel loneliness at all because I'm not lonely. I mean, I understand that. I still have my friends. They are just not with me at this point. I can always chat them, I can call them, or communicate with them one way or another. Same happens to my family, exactly. So the fact that I don't travel with someone doesn't make me lonely at all. And I don't even lack of some conversation or communication because I can communicate with people I meet along the way, and it compensates it.
Yeah, I was driving the other day and I was by myself and I was just driving to get dinner at a taco place by myself. And my daughter calls me. She's like, Dad, come get me. I don't want you to be lonely. I'll go with you. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I'm already up here. And when I got home, I had this conversation with her of the difference between being alone and being lonely. Because just because you're alone does not mean you are lonely. I've felt lonely before. Loneliness is I think people mistake being alone for loneliness quite a bit. Loneliness is a terrible feeling. It truly is. It's very destitute. It's very depressing, and I think it happens to people less than they think. And I think if people reached out, they would discover that they're not as lonely as they think they are. And it's a lot different than being alone. I suspect you just feel alone, which is totally fine.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you, with what you have just said.
So what was the most challenging thing that you've encountered on one of your trips that you felt like you really struggled? AC Solutions offers complete plug and play air conditioning conversion kits for your classic BMW, such as the E30, E28, and E24, and soon to be Porsche. Featuring OEM quality components with period correct finishes and materials, their products are designed as a drop in upgrade to your old factory system, but with the performance of modern technology. Their products stem from hands on design and development with a deep knowledge and passion for these vehicles. They're designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts, and they come complete with a full warranty, quality instructions mirroring those of the factory manual. Check out all their offerings at acsolutions.co. That's acsolutions.co. Petrol Box is a monthly service made specifically for the automotive enthusiast. Each month, they carefully select items including tools, detailing supplies, apparel, garage gear, stickers, and publications to be sent right to your doorstep. It's a curated selection of the latest and greatest gear in the industry. There are actually two different levels of subscription to choose from. The Petrobox Basic costs less than $20 a month, while the Petrobox Premium gives you more gear for $39.95 a month. Check them out at mypetrobox.com and be sure to use the code OVERCREST at checkout to get $6 off your first month, or $6 off the first month for the person that you just gifted a Petrobox to. mypetrobox.com. Use code OVERCREST.
There were some situations, but they were mostly about some risky situations. So they're not necessarily super challenging. These were just, how to say, like a short term risk, which I had to face during my travels. But yeah, anyway. So basically, what I'm saying is that when I was traveling by freight trains, sometimes I wasn't sure about the spots that I choose, which means that in some areas, for example, in some stations, trains can depart faster than usual, which means that sometimes you can get on the train somewhere, let's say, in the throat of the railway station, so far away from people, so being unseen, right? In a secured location, which is perfect for catching a freight train. But sometimes it doesn't work, and when you make a mistake on this, it may possess certain risk. So, for example, when I was trying to catch a train which was moving, I didn't calculate the speed properly of that train, and it happened to be too fast for me. So I managed to grab the handle of the train and didn't manage to properly handle it. So I only caught it with my fingertips, but not the entire palm. And so basically the train pulled me forward, and I fell almost on the wheels of the moving train. It was very, very close to them. And like I was just lying on the ground and thinking, like, what's going on? I mean, I expected to just die at that second, personally, but I didn't, and I just gradually crawled aside from the railway track, having realized that, okay, this time life is on my side. That was very sketchy, very scary. It definitely was not the risk that should have been taken. I understand it totally. It was my mistake that I tried to do so. But, without this experience, I would probably never understand it.
What is it about abandoned places that attracts you so much? I see a lot of traveling in the city and just experiencing city, grocery stores, religious sites, all these different things that you like to go see. But there's also this mix of abandoned places like underground bunkers, train tunnels, just if there's a train that used to be somewhere, you want to go find where it was. There's abandoned communist blocks, abandoned schools. What is it about things that are abandoned or derelict that makes you want to go see them?
There is a weird aesthetics in these places. I mean, the sense of neglect, of desolation. I don't know. It just resonates to some of my nature, I would say, because there is a theory in the, I don't know. So let's call it a theory that art has a therapy effect on individual. So there is an assumption that, for example, Dostoevsky, the famous Russian classic of the literature, it was assumption by one of the scientists who basically studied his works that he didn't kill people just because he described the way they were killed in their books, And it seems to me that I still have this kind of, grain of depression in my essence, in my mind. It's natural. Somehow I cannot describe it even more better. And this grain of depression just resonates with these abandoned structures, constructions. I mean, I see them and I see something of myself in these places. A tiny grain, but that's what attracts me.
Yeah, I wonder if there's anything. I mean, we do this here too. There's a town here called Duluth, and it's on the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes are the biggest freshwater reservoir in the world. They're huge. It's this chain of lakes. It's unbelievable. Massive ships will sink. These are just these enormous lakes. And they even write songs about them. And where I live in Minnesota, there's a lot of iron. So there's a lot of mining that happens. So they would mine all this iron, and then they would take them to these enormous ships, and they would dump all the iron on these ships. And they would have these piers that would go out into the water, and they stood probably 40, 50 feet out of the water. Just these enormous piers. And then they would pull the ships right up next to them, and then the trains would come, and everything would get kind of put on the ship. So they'd have these enormous cranes, and it was almost like these little cities would exist on these piers. And then, of course, once the iron ran out, these were no longer needed, of course. So then they became derelict and abandoned. And for me, there's something about going. I walk down this pier, and I would get in this crane, and I would sit there, and the instruction manual for the crane is still there, and everything is just as it was. And I just have this fascination of how these abandoned places are markers of time, like human time. Just, okay, I guess we've moved on to something else now, and all the humans are now over there doing this thing, but this marker of where we were is still here. And it's almost like this, it's history, but it's also this sense of entropy, which is things are always in a state of decay, right? They're always in a state of decay and decline. And if humans don't do something about it, everything returns to the earth. And I was thinking of when I was watching your videos, especially the one where you went into the nuclear bunker. And even in this nuclear bunker, which is deep inside a mountain, it's all the way in there. There's no activity. There's very little elemental change. There's no rain. There's no wind. There's nothing. And even in these places, things are turning and returning back into the earth. They're rusting. They're dying. They're cracking. They're turning to dust. And I'm really just fascinated by that progression of time that exists within these abandoned places.
Yeah, exactly. It also makes me feel that pretty much everything in this world is temporary. So, of course, these structures basically reflect it. Imagine that at some point people potentially lived prosperous life in these settlements which are currently abandoned, especially in some mining towns, right, that were thriving back in times when coal or ore were extracted actively. And, those people had families, they had plans on future, and some of them probably didn't even think about the fact that it will not last forever. And all of a sudden, mines are getting closed, and that's it. There is no perspective in that place anymore. And for some people, the only way to get out of potential poverty, which may appear on the site of these closed mining towns, right, was to get away from there. And that's how all of these ghost towns eventually appeared. So people didn't live there anymore. Their dreams, their desires just happened to be something temporary, you know?
Yeah, you said in one of your films that people would trade their land and their apartment or their house for a ticket away, just to leave. They would trade everything they have just so that they could leave.
There is still a couple of towns in Russia where you can buy an apartment for 200 or for 300 US dollars to buy an apartment, actual apartment with all of the amenities, facilities, just because there are no perspective in these settlements where these apartments are sold. Currently, I'm speaking about some Arctic area, specifically about the mining town of Vorkuta, which was one of my favorite places in Russia, which I visited. I also filmed a video from there and visited a bunch of entirely abandoned settlements around that town.
What do you think? It's interesting because you see these integrations in your films when you're walking around these towns, where you see these beautiful murals that are they're so colorful and they're well maintained, and like a block away is a mosaic of Lenin in complete disrepair. You know, the juxtaposition of those two things next to each other is incredible, and there's so much of the Soviet Union that peeks through a little bit, and the history of it and the evolution of it as you see it in the architecture is amazing.
True, true. So I frequently try to find some Soviet artifacts in places that I visit. Those are monuments or mosaics or just architecture. Well, just because it's a history of these places. It helps us understand how all of these areas were developed and how they reached the point where they are right now. So it's always a fascinating experience to find a well-made mosaic or a mural, exactly, especially if you know the origins of these mosaics and
Yeah.
murals. So you can
Yeah,
trace
a lot of
this
that stuff
history.
gets torn down.
Yeah,
You know, when there's revolution happens, nobody wants to remember what happened. They just want to move on, which is understandable. You know, I think it's important to remember history, but people want to move on, so they build new buildings and they build new structures, and the city grows, and you know, time marches on always. But in some of these places that are very rural, the economy probably just isn't advanced or doesn't have enough momentum to grow out of that change fast enough for that stuff to disappear.
so you mean that in rural areas these changes are like more evident, or?
I think in the rural areas, things, the velocity of the change is slower. There's less people,
Oh,
there's
true.
less economy, there's less money. So that I think that the like if you go to, you know, Leningrad, which is not that anymore, you don't see as much evidence of the Soviet Union as I do and dude, I've never been there. So this is just a perspective of somebody who watches stuff on YouTube, reads books. I've read Dostoevsky. I'm very interested, and I've written articles about people that have driven cars there and things like that. So I have a very limited Western perspective of what things are. But it seems like in the very urban areas, big cities, things change fast.
Yeah,
And most of the stuff that represents the Soviet Union has been replaced by something else. But in these rural areas, especially as it appears the farther you go east, they're still there, but the new thing is just built next to it. And the old thing is just there, rotting next to the new thing that has replaced the old thing.
yeah, it's absolutely true that major metropolises, major agglomerations are developing way faster than rural areas and just provincial towns. I notice it pretty much everywhere I go, regardless of the country, by the way. So it's a
Yeah.
worldwide process, true. And exactly, so in these rural areas, in smaller towns, there are higher chances to find these traces of the past because they're still represented in their original form, shape. When they are not maintained, yes, on the one hand, it's kind of bad because, they're ended up in disrepair, but at the same time, just the fact that they still exist there gives us the perspective to the past of that
Yeah,
area of the history.
absolutely. So where's next? Where do you want to go? When are you going to come to America and drive around in the South and the West and see what we've got going on here?
So, speaking about the upcoming destination, I can reveal the fact that I'm planning to explore Southeast Asia
Oh yeah,
throughout next 2 or 3 months. So there is a bunch of countries that I'm planning to visit, starting from Thailand up to Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, etc. There is a lot of them. So, and coming to US, well, it's challenging for me just because as a Russian citizen, I have to obtain a US
yeah.
visa, and currently it's not the best time to apply for it because
I
it's
suppose
frequently
not. I
denied,
suppose not.
naturally. Maybe in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
future.
Well,
I would be glad to
speaking
explore.
of Southeast Asia, um, how do you plan something like that? It's obviously you're planning a very large trip. How do you balance I'm just going to wing it, which is what I like to do too. When I go somewhere, I said, I'm going to go there. And then however long it takes me to get there is however long it takes me to get there. And whichever way I get there is whichever way I get there. But because you're filming and you're creating content and there's certain things you have to do. Do you have a fixer there? Do you know people ahead of time? How do you organize that trip in your mind? How do you plan all of that out?
So first, yeah, exactly. So I travel most. Oh, sorry, I plan most of my travels. I'm not a spontaneous kind of person because I have to at least be aware where I'm going and what I would feel in that places. So
Right.
every single journey is followed by research, which is done primarily by internet. So I explore this country where I go virtually, so on the web, firstly, reading travel reports of different people, starting from ordinary travelers up to experienced ones. And I'm trying to create my own path, create my own travel plan, itinerary basically, based on the
It's got to be
information.
hard on the internet because the internet's always going to want to direct you to the tourist trap, right? It's always going to, oh, look at this historical heritage site. You should go there. It's got 5 stars. This many 250 million people have seen this shrine. You should definitely go to this shrine. The internet always wants to kind of take you down the smooth path.
It actually depends which sources you address. So if you
Okay.
just Google, let's say, attractions of Sri Lanka, most likely you will get into this tourist trap. So you will be given the results based on the most famous places in the country. But at the same
Yeah.
time, there are less known resources, lesser known websites, or just pages of some individual travelers who publish information based on their experience. And that's the treasure.
Yeah, man.
And
As I've gotten older, it's unfortunate. Well, it's fortunate and unfortunate. I have a family now. I'm in my 40s, and I used to do a lot more exploring, and it's kind of sad in a way that I'm not doing more of it. And I feel like I get to live vicariously through you a little bit and watching what you do.
at the same time, I wouldn't say that there is anything wrong with the fact that you have a family, don't have an
No,
opportunity
no,
to
no.
travel, of course. But well, I feel you. What can I say?
Yeah, it's tough. You know, it's not a bad thing. Um, Now with Overcrest, we help other people explore. We do other things. Ivan, dude, thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. Is there anything else you want to talk about before I let you go?
I don't know. I mean, if you have questions, I'm free to answer them.
Well, I didn't want to take up too much of your time. Um,
Just in case I'm totally
what
free
is
today.
what's that?
Just in case I'm totally free today.
Okay, cool. We can keep going. I'll mark this and I'll edit this little part out. What is a place that surprised you when you visit, or it wasn't what you expected when you got there?
So probably I would mention that exact town that I have already mentioned, the town of Vorkuta. It's a small town in Russia which was known for the coal mining, and a lot of areas there happened to be abandoned after the dissolution of the Soviet Union with the closure of these mines. So people no longer had jobs. So that's how ghost towns basically appeared.
Yep.
And so it was actually my very first experience of exploration of actual ghost towns, not like individual structures, individual buildings, but the whole neighborhoods of abandoned towns, of abandoned places. Sorry, actual small towns, because the way they were constructed there was different from the way some smaller towns were constructed in other parts of Soviet Union, because it was far north. Cities had to look like cities. Actual houses with thick walls to protect people from cold, from frost, which happens there in winter. It's not the place to basically set a wooden hut, wooden cabin.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I basically ended up in the entirely ruined urban environment in these abandoned places. And I just, before going there, I just didn't realize that it would be that fascinating to explore it. I mean, yeah, I don't know what to say. It was just an insane experience, because exactly the same picture can be imagined in any other Russian cities or city of post-Soviet Union. So for me, it was sort of I don't know. So so back to that particular trip, I understood how the nuclear winter would look like. Hopefully, it never happens in real life. But I
Yeah,
know what to
man.
expect right now.
I wonder, they had that like the biggest nuclear bomb ever tested was tested by the Soviets. I don't remember what it was called. It's like the Tsar bomb or something like that. It was just, and they detonated it in northern Russia. And I guess it was the biggest nuclear explosion ever. And it flattened trees for like hundreds of miles. It was just like this insane, that might be an exaggeration, but it was like this insane thing. And yeah, the threat of nuclear winter is, when you think of the Cold War, that's something everybody was probably thinking about at one time. Have you ever thought about going to where they detonated that bomb, or, what attracts you to want to go and find a new place?
To find a new place, or the one related to the nuclear bomb?
Oh, whatever, man, whatever. Like, would you ever consider going up there? I gotta find a picture of it. It's like the Tsar Bomba or something. Yeah, there it is. I'm gonna share my screen here for a second.
The thing is that just less than a week ago, I was randomly scrolling YouTube and noticed a video devoted to Marshall Islands. And there was the video specifically about the bomb which detonated somewhere around Bikini Atoll. And back then, so after watching that video, I just got fascinated with that area and decided to find a time in the future and visit it myself to get this first-hand experience of how that area looks nowadays. If someone lives there nearby, to explore their life, it's just fascinating occasion in the world history. And
I wish there was more. Oh, so here's where it was. They detonated it on Novaya
Zemlya. Yeah, so new land / new earth. Depends on how you
New Earth.
Because
does anybody live there?
So primarily military contingent is staged there. I don't think that there are any permanent settlements. Maybe some, laboratories of scientists, polar scientists,
sure.
But that's it. And also that
area, you think like right here is America. Like if you go this way, It's tough to remember that like you've got the Barents Sea here, and it's just kind of like America is over here, you know, and it's easy to think of the Earth as flat, right? Because you look at a map. I'm not a flat earther. No, God no. But you look at you see it in paper, and you're like, oh yeah, the Earth's flat. But obviously it's round. So when you wrap, you know, United States and Russia around it, you know, it's across the top is the other place. It's super interesting. All right, so this bomb that they detonated there, uh, known as the Alpha America designation AN-602, is a thermonuclear aerial bomb and the most powerful nuclear weapon ever created and tested. It was 50 to 58 megatons. What was it on Hiroshima? Just to curious. So that's 50 to 58 megatons. Hiroshima was 15. So it was 4 times bigger than what they dropped on Hiroshima. That is crazy. Wow. And I think that was one of the last bombs that the Soviet Union tested was that one.
There were even some minor testings of nuclear bombs and weapon, which were not publicly discussed back to Soviet Union. And there were a couple of locations which are currently known where some of these bombs were tested. Those were primarily underground explosions. So the idea was to explore the effect of nuclear explosion underground.
Look at this thing. That is 100 miles away. 100 miles away, this bomb. My God. There's a couple other pictures here too. The visuals of the visuals of nuclear stuff is just crazy. All right, here's a map of what it would have total destructive radius superimposed on Paris. So it would have absolutely flattened the entire city of Paris.
Exactly.
Unbelievable. I mean, God help us all, right?
Yeah. I mean, hopefully the world manages to avoid it.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you know, you've been able to explore some of the infrastructure that used to house things like this there. You know, here, a lot of people just convert that stuff to apartments. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I didn't.
But they have nuclear missile silos here that used to be silos. They're in the middle of America, out in a field somewhere. There's just like a door, and the government just cleaned the missiles out of them, and people made bunkers out of them. You can look it up on YouTube. You can search it. They've now made apartments out of the nuclear missile silos.
Amazing. I mean, in Russia, most of these places just end up abandoned, as you can see in Chukotka, for example.
Yeah. Do you seek stuff like that out? Are there any of those that you want to find?
So, yeah, I've just mentioned a couple of places where some underground nuclear explosions occurred during Soviet times when they were testing these nuclear bombs. Well, it's a public information anyway. It's not a state secret. So the major problem is that these places are located in some remote areas, which are not easily accessible. So it requires hiking across deepest taiga, potentially for more than a couple of days, let's say, one way. And yeah, it just requires certain preparations and and time to allocate for this.
One of the most obvious places that people think of when they think of exploring abandoned Russia is Chernobyl. Have you been to Chernobyl?
I haven't been to Chernobyl, but it's more of the abandoned places of former Soviet Union, because as you know, it's located in Ukraine, not even in Russia.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
But indeed, it's a popular, it was actually still popular destination for this kind of tourism. I know a couple of people who went illegally to this Chernobyl exclusion zone just to explore it. They were fascinated by this entire neglect, abandonment, and the fact that there was this nuclear disaster back to 80s of 20th century. Yeah, so those were people who willingly went on a week of hiking across forests that were contaminated with nuclear waste, you know. They intentionally, suffered they intentionally suffered. They sacrificed a part of their health probably because there was still radiation. It still
Yeah.
poses threats for an average individual. Even if, well, of course, if you take some precautions, if you avoid certain areas that are heavily contaminated, you can reduce the risk of radiation effect, but you cannot eliminate it entirely. So hell knows what's
You're
going to be
just
with
not
these people
interested
after
in
years.
you don't want a third eye, is what you're saying. You're just
Yeah,
gonna
I mean,
pass on that.
it looks fascinating, true. Fukushima in Japan looks even more fascinating because it
Oh my
was
God.
a recent disaster. Well, yeah, it's disaster. I mean, it's a huge tragedy.
Has anybody, I guess I haven't looked, but I wonder if anybody, people had to have run in there. It's almost like if you lived in Japan, how could you not want to go? I would the drive and the urge to go look at that would be almost insurmountable. I don't know how I would stop myself from going.
Some of these areas are heavily secured, maybe because of this. I don't know about the
Yeah,
situation in Japan, at least when it comes to Chernobyl exclusion zone. It wasn't like you showed up at the main entrance and just go through. You had to detour, bypass all of these military checkpoints to be able to enter that zone. You had to hike across forests for days without an opportunity to fill your supplies. So you had to carry all of your supplies with you. There were no working grocery stores, of course. You had to deal with hydration on your own. So it was not an easy adventure, for sure.
have you heard of the Buran?
Oh yeah, the abandoned, how to say, like
Yeah,
space aircraft, right, in Kazakhstan. Which-
yeah. It's kind of strange that as a Western dude, I assume like you have Russia, but my brain thinks all of the Eastern Bloc. I just still think Russia. That's just like what my brain automatically does. So yeah, that's not in Russia, but it's. I've seen some video of people exploring that. Have you been there? Have you seen that?
I haven't been there, and I've seen a bunch of videos from there. They were indeed fascinating, but strangely enough, I've never had a desire to go there, to that particular place. It just happens to be, at least right now in 2024, quite a well known destination, even more known than Chernobyl, potentially. And
Uh,
I don't know, it just become a mainstream, that
yeah.
particular
So
area. And this kind of discourages me to go there.
so is it because it's not yours? Do you feel like when you discover a place on your own, it's kind of yours? It's your place?
There is something in it. Of course, somebody had already explored all of these places about which I might read on web or in some articles. But when at least these places are not super common or well known, you become the explorer. You know,
Yeah.
this sense of
Yeah, for
like
sure.
not necessarily making first steps, but you got the point. It's indeed
Yeah,
something.
plus you're a content creator too, so at some point there has to be a reason to go there. I mean, that does that factor in at all? Like, what content can I create from this when I go there?
Sure, sure. And by the way, speaking about Chukotka, I didn't really plan that trip the week before I actually went on that trip. So it was just a spontaneous desire to. You know what? First of all, I was thinking that as a Russian citizen, I would need a special permission to go to Chukotka because there are still some border areas of Russia that require permits to enter even for Russian citizens. Needless to say, about foreigners, for whom that would be a great deal to get there. And somehow I had an assumption that Chukotka wasn't that easily accessible until I messaged a couple of my acquaintances who actually were there, and both of them confirmed that there had no need to issue a special permit to get to Chukotka for Russian citizens. And that basically motivated me to go there eventually. So I just looked for, the nearest available flight, bought tickets, return tickets, and just went there. So I spent around a week totally on that journey, which was not so much considering the distance that I had to cover. I had to go to Moscow first from my city, then fly to Chukotka and conduct the same way back. So, but
Sure,
back then I
sure.
clearly understood that, yeah, it's not just interesting for me personally, it would also be interesting for my audience.
I think it's also what you find interesting is what your audience will find interesting. Because if you go there and you're not interested, that will come through in your content immediately, and people won't like it. But if you're interested in it and you're enthusiastic about it, I feel like that'll be something that people will love.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a great combo all the time. Sometimes I realize that the places that I visit wouldn't be that in, let's call them, in a high demand among my audience. It's just my personal interest, but I still go there just because I put my priorities first at this point. But sometimes my interest resonate with the interest of my audience, and here we come with some um, well-known videos of mine.
So you're leaving for Asia. Are you restless? Now that you know that you're leaving, do you get restless? Are you just ready to go? I mean, how do you feel when you're just static, when you're not doing anything?
That's the exact period of time right now when when I have prepared most of things for my trip, and I'm just waiting for the departure because of course I had to book flights in advance, so a week in advance at least. So I'm just waiting for the departure. But I don't know, I'm currently excited, so I'm pretty much ready for the journey. I twice or maybe even three times rechecked the whole route, which is still flexible. I just double checked the destinations where I go, realized that I set all of the markers on maps correctly, so I'm kind of well prepared right now, in my opinion. Of course, there is a lot of things that can be changed along the way, but I always leave some additional time, some gap for these changes, so it's totally fine. So now I'm very excited to go on my Southeast
Yeah,
Asian trip.
except now you just wait.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what sucks. You get so prepared to go, and then it's just life becomes waiting. Just waiting to go.
Oh yeah, yeah. For some people, not exactly for me, but life is just like traveling and preparing for travels.
It's going to be a lot different than exploring Russia, man. How are you going to deal with the language barrier? Because where you've gone now, a lot of times you speak the language, and I think there's some places where you don't. But I mean, you're not going to speak
That's a
Taiwanese
good
or
point
Vietnamese or
because
anything.
having no ability to speak local languages was the reason why I decided not to go to South America this year. Because initially I planned to go there in case I managed to learn at least some basic Spanish. Because I crave for communication with local people, and without even basic knowledge of Spanish, I would definitely struggle, especially in rural areas. Of course, some people
Yeah.
speak English, but somehow I feel that it wouldn't give me this proper communication with locals that I would definitely like to experience. And at the same time, in Southeast Asia, English seemed to be more widespread, or I don't know. People just seem to be fairly easygoing. And I don't know, I just have an intuition, some kind of the internal feeling that it wouldn't be a big deal to communicate with locals, either by gestures or by my English. It should be okay, especially in Southeast
How's
Asia.
how's train hopping in Southeast Asia? Have you investigated the laws and the regulations on hopping on trains?
Sure, sir. I've explored local railway
Well,
networks while preparing for this trip. I came to conclusion that train hopping is genuinely possible in half of destinations that I'm planning to visit. So not everywhere this time. We'll see how things will go on. Because of course, it's Southeast Asia. It's not like Trans-Siberian Railway where trains run every 15 or 20 minutes one way. It will take some time, of course, to wait for them, but I will definitely try to do so, at least somewhere.
yeah, it's interesting because it's different. If you get caught doing something and you're in Russia, you're in your home country,
Yeah, I
right?
know
So
the
you're a citizen of
consequences,
your home
possible
country.
consequences. Speaking about
Yeah, man.
foreign
So you,
countries,
you,
you
you
frequently have no idea what's going to happen to you,
yeah.
especially if,
Well, that's
yeah,
part of the risk, man, right? I mean, that's just part of the I mean, it's to be honest, it's part of the adrenaline rush of doing something.
yeah. I mean, it's not the desire to commit a crime or something. It's just the desire to have fun. I never
Yeah.
damage railway property. If I'm caught, I'm caught.
It's a victimless
Yeah,
crime.
exactly.
It's a victimless crime for sure.
Sure.
For sure. Um, what other challenges are you expecting there that are different than the travel that you've done in the past?
The weather, because I'm planning to cover part of the rain season in Southeast Asia. just because I have to go just now, like in October. So that's my deadline that I have. And in October, parts of areas of Southeast Asia experience the rain season, which means very high level of precipitation, which I never experienced before, because like rain is my worst, like least favorite kind of weather, let's call it this way. It's
Rain
Yeah,
sucks.
it sucks in terms of filming, in terms of overall condition when you're, like, I don't want to think about rain.
Yeah, yeah, rain is awful. There's also not, it's not as rural. I mean, anywhere you go in Asia, generally, well, depending on where you go, but if you're going to Sri Lanka or something, there's a lot of people
Sure.
and
Yeah.
there's a lot of villages and it's not as rural. So it's, where are you going to sleep? It's not like you can just throw as many tents up. It's not going to be quite as easy, I don't think,
It's likely that I will not bring my
tenting around.
tent to this particular adventure, so I'll try to stick to either some cheap hostels slash guest houses, maybe some couch surfing, also a nice thing
Yeah.
to stay at someone's place, or maybe just grab some light gear such as travel mat and sleeping bag, leaving alone the tent, and just camp somewhere. But once again, while preparing for the trip, I explored all of the possible destinations where I can end up in the evening, let's say, so where I would need to spend the night. And in 90% of cases, I would be able to spend the night somewhere, whether it be a hostel or a hotel for a reasonable price, of course.
Right. You ever hop on a train and it ends up going in the wrong direction and you can't get off? That's got to be like the worst nightmare of train hopping is you hop on it, you're waiting for it to go, that they change the drivers, and then it starts going in the opposite direction that you want it to go. You ever get stuck?
I would say that it happened to me a couple of times when I caught the train that was going right direction, but it was not going eventually to where I was expected. So the train was basically abandoned somewhere in the middle of the road, on the way, sorry, or just, I don't know, it just eventually just go different way. But it's not like you have to go right, the train goes left. Just somehow along the way, you realize that the train will not get you where you're going. That happened to me sometimes. You never know where the train might be abandoned.
In closing, what advice do you have for people about exploring in general, hitchhiking, train hopping, however they want to do it? What advice do you have for people that might not want to take the leap?
Exploring the world is a great thing, in my opinion. It's the first-hand knowledge that you can get in your life, because yeah, it's cool when you study, of course, in university, in school, when you get some theoretical knowledge about the world. When you travel, you can implement this theoretical knowledge in practice, or maybe you can learn something new along the way. And yeah, the world is great, even though, of course, everything has its own drawbacks and cons, pros and cons, right? But
Yeah.
anyway, it's great. So if you have an opportunity
It
to
wouldn't be
travel,
interesting
just
if
don't
it didn't have
hesitate
pros and
doing so.
cons.
And frequently, travels do not require a lot of budget. So you can always calculate your travels on a budget.
Well, people overdo that sometimes, right? The budget, they it's very easy to blow the budget up because of what you feel like you need and what you feel like I have to have this, I have to have that. I don't want to sleep with other people in the same room with me. I don't want to be in a hostel. If people temper their expectations of what they can accept and adapt to, and hey, most people adapt to anything. I don't, for example, to drag this on a little bit, I don't like it when other people snore in the same room with me. I can't stand it, to the point where my buddy Jake, who does the podcast with me, the dude snores so loud. It is unbelievable that a human being can project that noise. I can't believe it. So we stayed in this little tiny little log cabin that was it's like 10 feet by 8 feet, just small, and had two beds in it. I couldn't sleep, so he ended up sleeping outside, outside, like next to the picnic table, so that we could both sleep, because I was just throwing pillows at him and stuff like that. But if I could get used to it. I know I could. I could get used to it. And if you're tired enough, if you are tired enough, You will sleep through anything. I promise. I promise if you're tired, it doesn't matter that you're in a room with other people. It doesn't matter that you can feel a spring in the mattress, or it doesn't smell the greatest, or it's a little damp or whatever. You will sleep if you're truly tired. And if you're exploring in a way that like you do a lot of walking, you do a lot of, sometimes there's stressful things that happen. It's cold, your body's burning a lot of energy. You will sleep. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. And
Don't worry.
so if a person wants to travel, genuinely wants to travel, he or she will do so without any excuse.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, we all make excuses, right? Sometimes we want to be the person that could do what you're doing, but most people aren't going to take the leap to do it. But I hope people can find a small version of what you do. Just take like a small step and go experience something new. I think exploration is so important. The guest we had on before you was a neuroscience PhD when we talked about curiosity and exploration and why it's important to the human mind. And I want everyone to just explore, even if it's just a little bit.
So that's one of the interviews which is available on your channel, right?
Yeah, it's the one just before you. So we've got just before you is Charlie Wu. He's a PhD in neurology and why we're exploring, and then you're here to talk all about exploring on the. I think you're kind of on the ragged edge of what's possible for urban exploring. There's all kinds of different kind of exploring to do, but I think you're kind of on the edge of urban exploring. And I hope people can just do just a little bit. If they can just get out of their comfort zone a little bit, I think it will greatly benefit their life.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it requires leaving your comfort zone, but you set the priority. What do you want? To stick into your comfort zone or to do something else? So there is no enforcement in this statement. You decide for you, of course, what you want to do, but just keep it in mind.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me on the podcast. I feel honored to be able to talk to you. I've been a big fan of yours for many years, and it's very special for me to be able to talk to you. And I wish you the best in your travels, and I look forward to seeing that your adventure in Asia. Look forward to that very much.
Thank you again. Once again, appreciate you for invitation to this interview. So wish you luck in your
Take care,
job.
buddy.